So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming this afternoon. We are very honored to have special guests today who I'll introduce in a minute. Today we are going to be talking about the video game industry in British Columbia, and particularly working in the video game industry in a general sense. And we'll find out what our panelists have to say about various aspects of their experiences. Before we get started, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Nanaimo First Nation here in Nanaimo. And I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Vancouver Island University Department of Media Studies, the Media Research Lab, and the Faculty of the Arts and Humanities. Just to give you a sense of the background of why we're here and why we're doing this, it's partly because of the generosity of our guests, but it's also because the university has been exploring, partly from our own interest, but also the interest of the sector and the industry. We've been exploring various ways in which to harness the interest and the attention of people in the departments of computer science and media studies and in other areas, but towards what fits a need in the industry. As you may know, British Columbia has the third largest number of video game companies in the country. Third to Quebec, that has the largest, and second, Ontario, that has the second largest number. But ironically, British Columbia has the second largest number of workers, despite being a third largest number of companies, second largest number of workers. So there's lots of different people working in different ways. And our guests today will talk to you about different experiences that they've had, but the different companies in British Columbia are of magnitudes of scale in terms of size, from the micro company that has 1 or 2 people to the large scale company like EA Sports that you may have heard of, and many people in between. They have different scope, different size, different scale, different location. But one of the things that they all have in common is that there's a constant shortage of people. British Columbia, having an industry that is large and growing and wanting to grow even further, is acknowledging that there is a shortage of workers. So as students, you're probably saying, well, that could be me. And one of the things you need to know is how the industry functions, what people are looking for, but also what it's like to work on the inside of the industry, looking forward and looking out. One of the challenges that then we have to deal with is the question of supply and demand. Thinking about the question of supply and demand is a way of making sure that the people who are looking for things and the people who are looking for work have a way of understanding each other that doesn't require a whole lot of trial and error, perhaps is a better fit. So earlier in the fall, Jean-Guy, who is one of our panelists today, he met with me and he sat down and he said, well, these are the kinds of things we look for. These are the kinds of things that we have. And what can we do with the university to help it work a little bit better? So we started to explore that sort of thing, and Jean-Guy volunteered his organization, he volunteered some of his friends to come and speak with you today. So we have from this side going that way, we have Michael, Jean-Guy, Tristan, and Roger, who are all going to tell us a little bit about their experiences. Michael is going to moderate by asking a few questions, and they're going to give us some suggestions about their own responses to how that particular thing applies to them, or it could make sense to you. I would encourage you to think about and collect your questions for the end, and as best as possible, we'll make sure that there's some time for you to ask those. And to give you a sense of the company that we're looking at, they find themselves as having been the world's largest, this is from the website, world's largest publisher of cannabis games. And it gives you a little bit of a chuckle until you realize 20 million downloads and 3.5 billion active play sessions. It's not small potatoes. It's significant stuff. There's a space in the field all over. And having a game that works and works well doesn't just come by accident. It comes from a lot of hard work. And clearly, you're all interested in figuring out what that work involves. And I'm looking forward to what our panelists have to say, and I hope that I'm able to look forward to your good questions for them at the end. So welcome, and thank you for coming, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, is this on? Awesome. Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. So like the lovely introduction there said, I'm going to be moderating the panel. I thought we'd just start off by a brief introduction of each one of us, maybe going over our experience, years of relevant experience, that sort of thing. So my name's Michael. I've been with LDRLY for a little while now as their HR and talent coordinator. Before that, I was in the IT industry as a technical recruiter. And before that, I have years and years and years of experience just as a recruiter, not for the tech industry, but mainly I'm HR based. So then moving down the line to Jean-Guy.
Sure, I wonder if I should talk about LDRLY.
Yeah,
Another
sure,
person?
maybe give a bit more overview.
Sure, okay. So, LDRLY is a subsidiary, child, whatever, of Eastside Games out in Vancouver. And we started up really here last July, I guess it was. And yeah, I mean, I've been friends with the CEO of Eastside Games for about 10 years or so. I came from Toronto, had enough of living in Toronto, wanted to move out to the island and not have to be Toronto winters anymore. And when I came out here, Josh knew I was passionate about two things, weed and games, and said, hey, I got an idea. We don't want to build weed games anymore, so why don't you guys take them all and build them out on the island and see what you can do with it. And it's been great. We started off in July with maybe three of us maybe, down at the shared space, which is now Input. And we're now at, I think, we just hired our 18th person?
17,
Sure. We've got one person in transition who's leaving us to go off somewhere else. So I'll say 18, that sounds better.
Sure, 18
Yeah.
employees.
And we're looking at growing beyond that as well. So I'm really happy with what we've done here in the last year, and we'll continue to do in the future. But for myself, I started off in games I've been in games for about 15 years. Started off as a really horrible artist and realized that wasn't for me. She looked shocked. And then went into the engineering side. I graduated from U of T in artificial intelligence and didn't apply much of that to my computer science work in games, but still enjoyed it nonetheless. Then ended up leading teams, and like I said, I'm now out here on the island leading the studio here.
Hello, test? Okay. I sound like that? I'm the back-end engineer at LDRLY. I am a BIU alumni, I suppose. I was here from about 2010 to 2014. Spent some time in non-game related fields and have applied that, fortunately, here at LDRLY for the past year or so.
I'm Roger, I'm the front-end lead at LDRLY. I got a CS degree at Carnegie Mellon in 2003, and then I worked in technology for the interceding 15 years, but my first games job was probably 2017. I joined a company up here. I moved up to Vancouver Island at that time, and I joined a company. We published a breakdancing hand-animated game for the Switch called 4Kids, and then shortly thereafter moved on to join LDRLY. Yeah.
I just want to say something to add in. Roger's being modest here. When we hired him on, we've got some games that are built in Flash, believe it or not, or did have some games that were built in Flash, and had some horrible problems with one of our games, and thought that if it continued, would eventually sink our company. It was that bad. So we desperately needed a really good Flash person and the best one that we could. And got Roger's resume one day and saw that he actually wrote a book on Flash, an ActionScript Bible book. So Roger's a fantastic engineer. Tristan is on the back end, but on the front end, Roger's really, really great engineer.
Flash has been a bad word for like 10 years, so I'm never telling you about it.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So one of the questions I was going to start off to everyone was, what got you into gaming? What motivated you to get into the IT sort of tech industry / gaming? And then, more importantly, what made you stay? So maybe start down with whoever wants to start first.
Probably like many of you, I love video games. I love indie games. I think it's games is an amazing medium, unlike any other. And I think probably, if you asked 5-year-old me what I wanted to do, if I knew game design was an actual job, I probably would have said it at that time. For me now, did you ask how you got into it?
Yeah, just sort of how did you wind up into the industry?
Yeah, so I spent a long time in web and as a web developer in various different scales. And I started my own company, and I ran it for 10 years, and I sort of followed the trends, the technology along with my clients. So for 3 or 4 years, I was just doing iOS native apps, and then physical installations in VR in more recent years. But throughout all of that, whenever I could get a game project, I jumped at the chance. So I had done some games here and there, but always as a contract. So they were kind of odd. It wasn't like building a game for Xbox. It was like we have this, it's like we have this ad campaign for Chevrolet, but we want to have this like little game play, and so Chevrolet's going to say you can't run your truck into the wall because that would look bad, stuff like that. But the reason I stay in games is because I feel like it just has, compared to all the other fields I've worked in, a game is so complicated. It has so many systems and so many challenges to it. Creating and maintaining a game that works well and delivers a fun experience. It's not only a huge technical challenge, but it's a multidisciplinary challenge, and it crosses all fields. Art, design, writing, everything you can imagine. So it's just incredibly engaging.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of that. As well, probably if you asked 8-year-old Tristan what he wanted to do, was definitely game design, something of that nature. And during the course of my studies, I came back as a mature student, and I really wanted to get into game development more fully. And so I took every opportunity in the course of my studies here, different classes. If there was a way I could make a game or some sort of framework in support of that, I would definitely do it. Agreeing with Roger, probably the live ops portion, especially in the mobile game space, is very challenging and very entertaining. Staying on top of emergent behavior and ensuring gameplay experience is great for the end user.
Thanks. I think, the reason that I got into it is because I like being able to see the things that I was working on really quickly on the screen. And so back when I started, probably around the same time Roger did, in 2000 or so, at the early days of Flash, you were able to get things that were interactive up onto the screen really quickly, and you were able to see the effect of your hard work pretty quickly. And I think that things have only gotten better with that, with some of the game engines that are out there. And you were able to have fun and to see other people have fun with the things that you were doing. And that just kind of fed into my personality. And I think the reason that I stayed is just the challenge that every single day I'm working on things where it ranges from I have no idea what I'm doing with this to I think I can probably pull this off. And I really enjoy that, and I think I've always felt that. I always feel that I'm doing things that are outside of my comfort zone, and that there's so much to learn, and that just that keeps that challenge and that fire going for me, and it doesn't feel like I'm ever really phoning it in.
Awesome. Sort of speaking to the challenge, what would any of you guys say is one of the bigger challenges facing the gaming industry right now, and how would that sort of affect somebody new coming into the industry? Anyone?
Yeah, I think, the gaming industry is big. Like I said, that's a big term. There's anything that ranges, I guess, from simple little, let's say, mobile games all the way into these big AAA console games that might take 4 or 5 years to be able to build. I think maybe it being too homogenous might be a problem with the game industry, and that's internally some of the issues that we talk about, where it's a lot of money to build a game. So we're working on a game right now. I'd say the average for the games that we build, the average budget might be about $1 million, let's say, to be able to build it. And so when you're investing $1 million into a single project, there's a lot of risk that goes along with that, and you've got to offset the risk. And so typically what you do is you go towards these projects that are less risky. And that's what happens is we need to spend bigger budgets to get people to be able to play our games. And you see this the same in movies and television, when we wonder why all movies look and feel the same and all TV shows look and feel the same, and it's the same thing with games, is because the bigger the budgets are, the more risk that goes along with that. And we're all still attracted to those big projects. And so what ends up happening is you build a game that's similar to the game that other people are doing. And I think we probably feel that way as gamers, especially in the mobile space, that you're like, oh God, another one of these games that I've got to play. Somebody please do something different. And I think that's what the industry probably needs right now, is a couple more indie games to really shake things loose with the big industry.
Yeah, I would follow up with it's kind of a fine target. You've got your costs, your risks. Trying to hit the launch date as well. Definitely that's a big one. And try and beat your competitors, whatever it may be. Getting out earlier more often. I think from the back end perspective, one of the big challenges, especially with long running games, is maintainability of code bases. Especially, take it for example, if you're working on a AAA game for like 4 or 5 years, by the time it's launched, maybe some of that tech is already outdated and you're already having to refine things. Similar kind of experience for mobile backends, although the front ends are often iterated very quickly, new versions. It's very often the back end is kind of more long lasting. You have to be a little more risk averse in that sense.
I've got a few slightly different challenges that came to mind. Indie-apocalypse is one of them. Like, there's just so many games out there. Everyone wants to make games. Everyone is making games. There are a lot of games. Really hard to stand out. The drive to the bottom that's long ago hit the bottom for app pricing. So essentially, at least in our industry, among our peers, you can't launch with a game that costs money. Are you kidding? So we have to use pricing models that don't charge up front, and that can involve a lot of risk for investors and stuff like that. So the pricing models are a big challenge to the gaming community or the game development community. There's also a challenge in there's also a lot of people who want to make games, and it's hard to stand out in this field. And there's this sort of double-edged sword with we have amazing every year there's more powerful tools available for cheaper, for free. And there's more opportunities to do good work with them. But I feel like also some of the tools that were the tools that we use in indie games have started to be used for everything and stopped being so accessible. So something that someone a few years ago might just say, "I just learned Unity, it's easy," and like, oh my God, no, Unity is huge. Like I tell my team, like you can't even try. Just don't even try to like learn all of it. That'll never happen. By the time you've learned everything that's in Unity, you'll be 3 versions ahead of that stuff. They're iterating so fast too, so it's dizzying, it's hard to keep up, but unfortunately that's sort of similar to my experience in other areas of technology, so it's not unique to games like web development. There's just a new flavor of the week, so yeah, those are a couple extra challenges.
Awesome, thanks guys. What would you say would be a change or shift you've noticed in gaming, and then you kind of think that way of how you've noticed things have changed and maybe make some predictions about where you think things are going to change or head to in the future? Anyone want to take that one up?
The one big change that's going on, and this is for maybe most back-end large deployments, is the move towards containerization of your back-end app services. Docker, a lot of you have probably heard of that. Taking it one step further is clusterizing your app deployments. So these days, Kubernetes is the big player. A lot of lessons learned, especially from the Google folks in developing that technology, and that seems to be the big shift, at least on the back end.
I would say one of the changes that I've seen over the last year and a half or so that I'm actually really happy about is relating to some of the tools that can be used for games. So there was a period of about, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years where everybody was building all their own stuff. They would build all their own back-end, their own analytics tools. Some people were building their own game engines. And I think what ended up happening that caused that was that there would be game studios that would create their own game engine to build their game. And their game ended up being crap, but they had this game engine that became kind of the value of their company, and it ended up selling for a bunch of money and all this stuff. So people ended up doing that. But after a while, as I've said, the graveyard of dead game companies was filled with everybody that built their own engine. And it's now kind of getting back to the point where we can just focus on making games ourselves and not try to worry about building all of our own tech, and use kind of that approach, I think, of buy it rather than build it. Is something that I've always been a fan of as an engineer or programmer, and to know what your limits are and what your capabilities are, and use what other resources you can. So even on the Unity side, for example, if you if you're not great at art, don't try to build that art. Just go to the asset store, get something off of there, focus on the things that you are good at, and hopefully you can team up with somebody that kind of complements your shortcomings. We all have them.
One other change in recent years that I've noticed, I haven't been in games that long, so I don't know how much of an authority I am on this, but definitely seeing the rise of like seasons as a thing. Like, you know, I guess maybe not recently, but a long time ago, you know, you made a game, you came out with it, you shipped it on a disc, and that was it. But it's now games as a service, and so you have to, if you're building a game that if you're going to be opt into this model, not everyone does. People still sell standalone experiences, but at least in mobile games, quite a lot of the time, you're never done, and you're sort of expected by your community, and the community can be very vocal. You're expected to come out with content a lot, like constantly, and that can have big implications, not just on the kind of people you need on your team, and on how long you can expect your game to last, and also your maintainability of your code base can be a big issue. If you think you build something fast now because just as get out of the door, get it working, that's a very common refrain. But if that code is going to be in play for 10 years throughout all the seasons and stuff, you can dig yourself quite a large mountain of technical debt.
Awesome, and actually, I want
to add something there to what Roger's saying is that, and this does happen, games of 10 years. For us, we just finished in December, we sunset a game that we had for 9 years. One of our games, Grassroots, from the shirt here, has been out for about 5 years on iOS as well, and is still going strong, still keeps the studio going. And when we look at new games, that's a lifespan that we're looking at for our games, is about like a 5-year period. And so rather than just kind of the building of the gold master approaches of what used to be done, now we focus on building systems into the game that we can then easily add the content in. And just to add too, like this is something that you do when you have a company, when you've got 10, 12 experienced people that are working on this and you've got the budget to be able to do it. It's certainly a lot different case if you are, you and your buddy building a game out in your basement. You take a different approach to it.
Awesome. And just on a general sense, I kind of wanted to input to this. I've noticed in IT and recruiting in general that there's a lot more women in this industry than there used to be. Even just in my short time here, I've noticed that I've interacted with a lot more women in tech and in gaming compared to when I started. So I just think that's a cool point, and I just want to put it out there. Women are awesome. What is one of your biggest misconceptions about gaming, or even tech in general, that you notice people outside of the industry have that maybe now we could use as an awesome clarifying and educational moment?
That it's fun. No, well, kind of. I mean, I think for some of us, we might get into games because we really love playing games all the time. Especially, we see this with our QA people, who we're always looking for more QA people, by the way. That you get into it because you really, really love games and you think, this is awesome, I'm going to be like immersed in games all day, and then I'm going to go home and play some more games, and then I'm going to come back to work the next day and make more games and go home and play more games, and then, I think we need a break from it. You need to have that mental break, and I think that, I thought that I would love playing games more after work than I do right now. To be honest,
I still play games.
I wish. Actually, I do at work actually, and now that I think about it, when I do go home, my kids are like, "Why are you still playing that game on your phone?" And it's just, well, it's research,
It is a bit like learning the magic, the science behind the rainbow. If you just look at the rainbow, it's really, really pretty, and oh wow, and then you learn why it is the way it is. It might take the magic a little bit out of it if you're in it all day, every day.
Some of the biggest misconceptions, my in-laws always ask me to fix their computer. That seems to be a constant. Otherwise though, one of the big things, and that kind of gets glossed over, is just the stick-to-itness, if that's a word. Get used to failing builds, whatever. you know, hitting failures often, and then every now and then you hit a success and you get a good buzz off that. But just the amount of time sometimes you just have to dedicate to thinking through a problem. Sometimes it gets glossed over in the general public.
There was a thread on this, I think Rami Ismail was talking about it a little bit ago. There's a misconception, well, I don't know if it's a misconception or not, but it's something surprising. Surprising how long, like in my previous game, how long we were working on that game and it was just not fun. And then like, it only started to be fun in like a month or two before we shipped it. I think the context of that was like, actually started out as a conversation of like optimizing. Oh, we started out with the Cyberpunk 2077 stuff. With like, oh, the game runs slow, and people were like, wow, this close to release? And game devs across the world were like, yeah, well, it's not like you have time to optimize stuff like when you're rushing to a release. So yeah, like I did the same thing in our very small indie game and jumped in the last month or two, and like some really bad load times that were getting us rejected from Nintendo. You know, of course we didn't have time to look at that until it became an issue. So. Yeah, games really come together at the end, but then when it does, it is very rewarding. So, I mean, not all the surprises are bad surprises. Another thing that's misconception-ish is everything takes like, you think everything's gonna take like 150% of how long you think it's gonna take, but everything takes like 4 times as long as you think it's gonna take, maybe 10.
One of the things, it's not so much a misconception, it's more, I think, maybe naive to this, was just how volatile and fast-moving the tech industry is in general. I mean, this is relevant to gaming as well, but before I was in IT recruiting, standard hiring times, you can take a month to 2 months to sort of go through an interview process, whereas in IT it's 2 days, 3 days from when you apply to the job to where you're hired and you start Monday. It's pretty intense. Less so here on the island. I think the island in general is slower moving than the rest of the world.
4 days.
Yeah. But in Vancouver, I mean, I've filled roles that were like, 2-3 days. So it's very intense, and if you're not aware of that before you get into it, it can be a little shocking sometimes just how fast things are. And just with the volatility, companies that seem super solid and they're great and they've got some awesome games, and then tomorrow they're closed and 200 people out of work. Like it's a very high pay, awesome industry, but also just, kind of by the seat of your pants kind of industry as well. So kind of with, oh, sorry, were you gonna say something?
Well, I was just going to talk about like the when you hear about this, about these big game studios that are shutting down with a couple hundred people and stuff. If you were looking at getting into games, you can, if you do a bit of research, you can see the writing on the wall for a lot of these studios.
Yep.
And so, if you are looking at getting into this, you should really do some research into what you're getting yourself into. Because some of this stuff is well documented out there. If you just Google it, you can see what's happening and check out like Glassdoor and stuff like that, and see what former employees are saying about the place. It's not all studios are like that. It does happen, and I mean the bigger that they are, the more that it hits the news and they like to talk about it. But there are a lot of studios in Vancouver that are not doing that sort of thing and don't take that approach as well.
No, but it does lead up to a good point then. What would be some awesome advice that you would give to somebody coming into the industry? What would be like that golden nugget of advice you would think?
As a student?
Yeah, as a student.
Is everybody here is students, I'm assuming? Okay. So the thing that I always say is, and I've interviewed and hired many people in this industry, and the thing that I just beg to students when I talk to them is please do projects outside of your schoolwork. Because if I'm looking at hiring a junior position of somebody who's straight out of school, and I have 10 resumes in front of me, and the portfolio that everybody's showing me are the projects that they did, that they say this was one class project that I did, and this is another class project that I did, but you haven't done anything outside of your class projects, is not enough to stand out, and you need to be able to stand out, and it doesn't take much because nobody's doing this. I don't know why nobody is doing this. If you want to work in this industry and you're passionate about games, then you should always be passionate about games, and you should be making them, and you should be trying things. And don't worry about getting A's or anything like that. Take that time. I've said to our past intern that worked with us last summer, is C's get degrees. Put your time into other projects, really. I mean, if you can do good in school and you want to go off into your master's or whatever, then that's great. You're working towards your goal. But if your goal is to graduate and come out with a job in the industry, whether it's games or whatever else, is to show your passion that you have. And so we say this to the artists that are coming to the work in the studio, do stuff outside of that, and I'd say to everybody here, it's anybody can build a game, anybody can pick up, even Game Maker. You don't need to show off your coding skills, you just need to show that you're passionate about that. And I promise you, from like an HR perspective, you will stand out a ton. I mean, honestly, from the resumes that we see here on the island, if you write a cover letter, you will stand out from everybody else.
Oh God.
So just, show your passion.
So can I ask you, while you're in that frame of mind, when we met earlier in the fall, you mentioned a few different strata of types of jobs. You talked about the engineering roles, the various different kinds of roles, and many people shoot towards the end and shoot towards that big
Sure.
role. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's obviously like a tree of kind of positions that are within the game industry, and let's assume people here are getting in on the engineering side. You want to become like Roger. You want to become a lead engineer at a game company eventually, and that might take you 6 or 7 years to be able to get to that position. So you got to work back from that goal, right? And to work back from that goal, as you work all your way down, probably your first position might be in QA. And this is where we see us, where we really like to be able to work with people who are interested in getting into it, because you don't need to have a whole lot of experience, you just need to have a lot of passion for games. And typically what happens is you start off in a role like that, and then you move off you move up when the job becomes available, because it's easier for us to hire internally than it is outside. If you were to be on the other side, where maybe you want to be on the game design or art, probably more on the game design, maybe you want to be a producer in games, or like lead a studio, you might start on the community side. And so for us on the community side, this is where you do customer service and support. You're dealing one-on-one directly with players. In both areas, you're really getting to know the games, but it's a slightly different view. QA is more bug tracking and that sort of thing. They typically fit people who are a little bit more introverted, maybe, whereas the more outgoing, kind of creative people will gravitate over towards like a community customer service role. And I mean, Tara, who's down here, is a great example for that. Even though she was in the Comp Sci program here at VIU even last year, we stole her from that program to come and work in the community side. She worked in the community side from maybe April until a couple of weeks ago, where she was promoted on as a junior game designer. And for Tara to come in and try to get a job as a game designer directly out of school would have been very difficult. But instead, she went the foot in the door approach, and she showed her passion, she showed her desire. She came to a lot of the local meetup group that we have here, the Mid-Island Game Pints, maybe? Game Dev Drinks? Sure, Mid-Island Game Developers. You can search for it on Meetup and find it. And they meet once a month, and then you kind of get to know people within the industry on the island. But I think that both of those, either one of those paths, will lead you to, with the exception of art, will lead you to kind of any outcome that you probably want within the industry.
Did you guys want to touch in on that at all?
What was the question?
What advice would you give to a newcomer?
Oh, sure. So if you're joining a studio, or in fact any established company for that matter, straight out of university, the one thing I would suggest is kind of develop the ability to get used to existing code bases and try and develop a mental model as quickly and as efficiently as possible. You'll make good friends with your coworkers if you can do that. But oftentimes, if it is an established company you're coming in to sit with, that's probably going to be your first role. You're probably not going to be writing very much new code, but maintaining a lot of existing code that's running in live ops situations. So kind of getting used to that frame of mind would behoove you very well.
At the risk of providing counterfactual evidence, I'd like to say that it's a huge leg up when I'm interviewing people. It's funny, before I started having to interview people, I was strongly of the mindset that anyone can become a game developer, a game programmer, and we can take, you can all learn all this stuff on the job. That's not true, but having a computer science education is a good thing, I think. And knowing, just knowing why things are the way they are, more than being able to throw together a script that works, understanding all the possible things, all the structures of language and whatever language it is, I don't really care. And that's less important. And how you can, how you can architect things in different ways, that is very, very important. And also interview tips, I would say, be able to talk about, come in thinking of a project that you're very excited about, and share your excitement for the project, but also have in mind, if you're interviewing an engineering role, be able to talk about a part of the code that is really cool and why it's cool. And a lot of people come through and they're not able to give specifics about. I try to get people to talk about what they're excited about, and sometimes it's like pulling teeth. And it's weird because I know everyone out there has a project that they built that they really love. And so if you ever come in to interview with us, bring that in mind and tell us why you love it. Tell us why you did such a great job on it.
Yeah, and actually, to speak to that further, I've interviewed a lot of people where 3 or 4 people have almost an identical skill set, or highly educated, good experience, and what will usually set one person apart above another is personality, is showing your excitement, like what Roger's talking about, because so many gaming companies are very small, or they're very close-knit, and finding a really good culture fit and somebody that works really well with the existing team, it's important to show off who you are as your personality, and making sure that that personality will jive with everyone else too. So don't be afraid to talk about your passion, and if it's Unity, then go off about Unity, whatever works. But it's hard sometimes. I know with tech there's a lot of maybe more socially less exuberant people, so it's sometimes hard to do that in an interview. But I think Roger had some good advice there. What would you guys say would be an awesome resource or resources that newcomers could tap into? I know Jean-Guy already mentioned the game development. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I'll second game jams. I think they're cool and important. They're not the only way you can get experience. So it's not staying up 48 hours and working about is not for everyone. And don't let that make you feel like that's the only way you can improve yourself, set yourself apart. If you can do it, that's great. If you can't, there's come in the door with, personally, way back when I was starting out, I was trying to make the transition from my first job working for AOL on actually building parts of the AOL client into doing more web design stuff. I wanted to be more artistic. So I could show people what I did on AOL, but it was not relevant. So I stayed up a lot of nights, and I asked everyone I knew if they needed a website, and I did a jewelry website for my then girlfriend's aunt, and just the stupidest stuff. But it's a huge help to build up work of your own to show, no matter how you get that work, and it doesn't have to be paying work, like I said. So yeah, find a venue to express yourself and show some of your work.
I think for game-specific, Gama Sutra is a really good resource online as well. That especially from a game design, probably engineering, I think they do a bit of that too. I really like the business side of games, and so that's a bit more of my focus over the last couple of years. There is a game jam that's coming up this weekend. Global Game Jam, and it's a makerspace. And if you did look up that meetup.com and reach out to the people on there, Mike or myself, then we can give you some more information. And it's not too late to put a team together and join something like that. It is really fun. You don't have to be there for the whole 48 hours, but just being surrounded by some other peers and you're kind of all in it together, a little bit of stress. It can be a really fun experience. I do want to say too, in terms of just to hit home one more time about the building projects, I think that the most important thing for that, and it does kind of come back to resources in terms of Unity is a great engine to work with, even to kind of get your foot in the door with it, because there are a lot of resources out there for it. The tutorials and the sample projects that are set up are really good because they're kind of at different stages of completeness that you can jump in and you can feel like you're accomplishing things. And I think that feeling of accomplishing things and completing, you should look to complete small cycles, as many of those cycles as you can in building games. So for your first game, don't try to build like an MMORPG all by yourself, you know? It's too much to take on, and the thing is that when you complete that project, it took so long that you don't have enough to actually learn from it. So there's a book called The Lean Startup that I would recommend that says that you should take this approach of failing early and failing often. Complete a lot of small cycles because that's where you learn. And when you learn from completing that cycle, then when you go into the next one, you can apply what you've learned. And then you kind of keep this snowball going. And if you have one person who worked on one project for a year, or another person who worked on a project every month for a year and built 12 projects, that person will have better experience than the person who built that one project. So do small little things, get small little successes, learn some stuff from it, get used to failure, and embrace it.
Yeah, just add, actually, the end of February, there is a Battlesnake tournament at Input Logic, the co-work space. So if you're really interested in getting dipping your toe into back-end development, like on a very fast timeline, I highly recommend participating in that. There's going to be a lot of people to help you out, and I did it last year. It was very fun and entertaining, and learned a few things. So, hi. Battlesnake?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I believe you can check out like play.battlesnake.com, and it has most of the rules and stuff. But essentially, it's a Cartesian board. You write the AI for your given snake, and they compete on a board. So either they gather food in which they grow. Your snake can't collide with other snakes, or it can't collide with the border either. Border of the game board. So from there, you have a very well-defined RESTful API. You make a backend for it and hook it up to the main Snake server and watch the fun.
And you all compete together at the same time?
Usually they try and group it out. So I mean, there's only room on the board for maybe at most 6, maybe 8, but that's incredibly crowded depending on the board size. So 4 to 6. Yeah.
And everybody's watching this.
Everybody's watching the snakes. That's updated in real time. So generally, from the experience last year, we worked on our snakes all day, and then we had a kind of little break, and then the tournament actually began, and we could watch in real time them battling on the big screen TV. And it was a lot of fun.
Because I didn't like the resources I said earlier weren't really resources. There's a GDC archives. They put a lot of the talks online. That can be like really, really, really AAA stuff. So some of it is just too much. I would say also, like, a lot of the games that are released during jams, if you see one that you really like, a lot of them have source code included, and you can see how other people did things. I was going to say, there's a lot of AMAs with indie game creators and game studios alike. You can learn a lot of things, not just about the business and the process, but sometimes technical stuff through that too. And follow a lot of game developers that can help too.
Yeah, awesome. And for me, I get asked the question a lot: is how do I get hired? How do I get into the gaming industry? Who's going to hire me? And the advice I always give is just start meeting people. Just like these guys are always saying, is just go to events. Go to every event you can think of. There's quite a few on the island. There's a lot in Victoria. There's multiple Slack channels for Victoria meetups. I would go to every single one and just start meeting people, because you'd be amazed that so-and-so knows so-and-so knows so-and-so, and oh hey, they're hiring, and you kind of might be a fit, and then all of a sudden you're into a company that you've never known about otherwise. So sort of segueing away a little bit, does anybody want to ask each other a question and just, prompt each other to maybe talk about something that I haven't sort of prompted you guys to talk about yet. Is there anything we want to make sure that this lot gets to hear?
I have a question for Roger.
There you go.
If I'm starting Unity for the first time, what should I stay away from and what should I embrace?
I'll try to keep this really short. I think learning everything new, there's going to be a period where it doesn't make any sense and then it clicks. So the thing that clicks is components. So just think about components as individual behaviors. And so you have your game objects. This game object knows how to do 3 things, so it should have 3 different behaviors attaching to components. And then another thing about Unity that you get lost in the weeds. Everyone has a different way of discovering the connections between different things. You just pick one and stick with it, don't worry about it.
Okay, I've got one for Roger and then one for both of you. Oh, sure. Okay. Roger, what would you say your top 1 or 2 design patterns are for games?
Yeah, I'm not even going to say the word singleton, so there's I think adapter pattern I end up using a lot of because you end up switching out, especially like I was saying earlier, these long-lived game engines and long-lived code bases. You end up wanting to swap something out for for a different thing that's better or different or whatever. So you make adapters. So basically, the rest of your code it looks the same, but underneath the hood you switch everything out. Event pattern, obviously, in observables. That's 2.
Thanks. And this is a question for both of you. I mean, back when I was a comp sci student, we just were hit really hard with documentation and had to have perfect, nice, clean, beautiful documentation for our code. What's your feeling on that in the real world?
I'm a bit of a fanatic about this. If at all, keep your readmes updated, keep them in the code base. A lot of organizations like to move to Confluence and stuff, and granted it's very advantageous for other team members, but from an engineering perspective, if you want to get a new team member up and rolling, whatever, having everything kind of nicely packaged and documented all within kind of the same repository just saves a lot of time and makes it easier for everyone.
I try really hard to be pragmatic about things, so I realize that everyone has a different coding style and everyone has different preferences. And when I'm hiring people, I don't care, how you indent or whatever. But and to a large degree, commenting falls under that. But there's a certain minimum. Basically, my feeling on it, I'll tell you how I do a commenting, and then of course, I'd love if everyone else commented like that, but you don't need to comment, if you can read the code and imagine yourself reading it as someone else, if you can read the code, you don't need to comment it. If it's doing something complicated, oh my god, comment it. If you are, and a really, really, really good practice is to every public class, please write, to say what it does, unless it's so stupid obvious, but it's a really good practice. And then with it really fits well into modern IDEs. The fact that you can just hover over a method name or something and get the description. There's definitely an upside to writing comments, but I'm not a stickler for it. It's more important to me. Oh god, there's 2 more things about documentation. More important to me to document the large systems and how they interact, and document any weaknesses in them or things you haven't gotten to or things that you think might break in the future. Super important to document high-level stuff. And put your documentation, and this is a rule for a lot of things in code. Put the stuff. If A is about B, put A close to B. So don't. This also works a lot for coding. So don't unnecessarily have something reference a constant. Don't put it in another file if you want to use it here. Put it there. So minimize, be good on your future self and minimize the amount that you have to hunt for things. That just applies all throughout everything.
Awesome, I think.
Great. So I don't want to cut them off, but given the time, what I want to make sure is that if you have time for questions, And what we'll do, perhaps if it's okay with you, I'll start off by asking you a question, and then what I'll do is if you have a question, you can raise your hand, and I'll come around while they're answering that. And I will give you the mic, and you can ask them a question of your own if you like. But my question has to do with sort of my broader interest. We've been talking a lot about very good specifics, and that's fantastic, because that gives like a concrete amount of things. I have sort of a broad and vague question. Some of you came to the island, some of you were on the island to begin with, but the big question is, and Jean-Guy, when I had a conversation with you in the fall, you want to make a go of it on the island, which is really different than making a go of it in Vancouver, or making a go of it elsewhere. Can you think about the idea, and perhaps all of you there who are here thinking about, I'm going to graduate soon, and this means that I must A, leave, or whatever. Can you make a go of it here, or who would be involved in that kind of space?
Yeah, I desperately wish people would make a go of it here. I think we're not the only game studio in town. We've got Cloudhead Games just up the road in Qualicum Beach, who focus on VR and are doing absolutely stunning work that is winning awards for their games. And so it's nice to have that variety here. We want to grow the industry out here. When I first moved out here in Toronto, there wasn't anything. There was Cloudhead, but that was it. And I think I felt when I came out here, I can't be the only one. I can't be the only one in a city of 100,000 people that is either working in games or wants to do it. And that's why we started the Meetup group, is to try to bring people out of the woodwork, and that's what we found, is we found people who are working remotely for other game studios that are here on the island. There's something special about this place, and that's the reason that we're all here. And we know that, we've got, we're up against some things, and that we're the only studio, and we're taking some risks in being here to do that. But I think that everybody talks about work-life balance, but we're actually living it here. And it's worth the risk to me.
I have a counterpoint to that. I love living here on the island, and I wouldn't trade it for the world, but I'm an old guy with a lot of experience. I think, I hate to say it, but moving to a place where there are just a ton of jobs and like super fast paced when you're young, you can get a lot of experience that way, and I can attribute a lot of my success to connections I built when I was younger working like in a big city.
So it's kind of a 6 to 1, half dozen of the other.
Yeah,
I do think, having recruited up and down the island and for Vancouver, based off of what I've seen, and I would bet money on this, Nanaimo is becoming a suburb of Vancouver. We're very, very quickly on our way to that path, and I think it's just a matter of time before our tech industry here in Nanaimo just starts to explode in the way Victoria's really exploding. Victoria has an obscenely high amount of IT in it for how relatively small it is to Vancouver, and it's because I think it's become basically an offshoot of Vancouver, and I think Nanaimo's doing the same thing. So I think it's on its way, Roger.
Oh, I just want to say I feel incredibly lucky. I graduated here in Nanaimo, and I haven't had to move to larger cities to get that experience. So I feel incredibly blessed in that respect.
So we have a question here.
Hello, I'm Joel. I'm a computer science major here. My question basically is with how you mentioned earlier briefly about the whole you can't really sell games online. Would you, or attach anything there? Would you recommend for someone who's coming in and they want to publish something on Steam, for example, as a project? Is that a viable option for putting into a portfolio and including that in there? Because then you can see review trends and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should come out to the game dev meetup, because there are some people that are talking about doing these sorts of things. I think that I would do it. If you're thinking about doing something like that, first of all, set a realistic bar of success for yourself, and just say, you know what, it's gonna bomb. I'm not gonna put a lot into it, but I want to learn from the process, because I want it to be that the third game that I do succeeds. And so I'm gonna completely fall on my face on the first one. And then the second one I'll fail not as badly because I learned a lot from that second one. And then on that third one, that's where I'm really gonna hit it. So that's probably the way it's gonna go. No matter how good you are, we all hear these success stories about their first game was success, whatever. They're so rare. So don't put too much care into that first one, just use that as a learning experience. And I think that that's a great idea because it gives you a learning outside of just the game, just outside of the coding of the game itself, and gives you a different view of what it takes to build a game and into the business of games. And that having that in your portfolio and that understanding is really a great thing for you to be able to have.
We have a question?
Yes, so you've spoken a lot about in terms of the programming and engineering side of it. I was just sort of wondering if you had advice or any general sort of ideas about like more of the visual, like concept artist or like the visual sort of side of the gaming industry.
Sure, we were actually supposed to have our game designer, who's too busy to be here today, and our lead artist was supposed to be here today, but again, he's just completely swamped. And so I would, if I get this wrong or if I don't give you enough information, then you can come and see me after and I'll put you in contact with Dan, who's been in the industry for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years maybe. I know from working with Dan though that his advice would be from an artist getting into the industry. If you're not in an art school, would be to go to probably the best art school that you can and to set yourself up for success in that sense. He is very critical of new artists that are coming in, and he has an incredible to almost the point of annoying attention to detail. And so he will pick small things apart. And I think that your experience, my wife is a designer, and so I know from talking with her about her experience in school, is you go through these critique processes when you're in school, and you're kind of used to that constant feedback that you're having to get, and you're not taking it personally, and you know that it's just for the good of what you're trying to do. So I would say to focus on that. I think that something good from a kind of more creative, whether it's game design or art side as well, would be to look at case studies. So to see some of the games that you like and to reimagine what those games would be like in different styles. In previous places that I've worked at on the game design side of things, a common test that we would give for a game designer, this would be to take a game like Pac-Man, and how would you reimagine Pac-Man with in-app purchases in the game? So to take something that is a well-known game or something that you're passionate about and try to, pound that square peg into the round hole, and how do you do something like that? Because that's where we really see your creativity come out with it as well. And I think if you're working with things that you're passionate about, it's not going to feel like work, and you're constantly going to do it. And again, as I've said before with the small cycles, you're constantly doing it, you're improving each time, and you just have to be at the early stage of your career for whatever it is, but especially art, you need to be prolific, and you need to just hammer stuff out.
Also, I'd say, definitely like have a style and work out your portfolio, but sometimes when you're interviewing for a job, sometimes it's hard to tell if someone's gonna be a good fit if they haven't done art that's somewhat in the same vein. So I would also, I don't know if I'm contradicting myself, but also please try a bunch of different styles out and have a range in your portfolio, because there's more likelihood that it'll intersect with what people are looking for already.
Just one more thing to add too, from the artist, be careful. Take a look at what you really want to do, the game studio that you want to work at. Often when we're getting into this industry, we're attracted by, I don't even know what, let's say Fortnite. That's what my son plays. But you take a look at a AAA game, a game that's had a ton of money going into it, and you're like, I want to work on that game, or I want to work on the next Mass Effect, or whatever, something like that. And you have this romantic idea of what that thing is going to be like and what it's going to be like to work at it. Typically, those games, you get beat down, and you work a ridiculous amount of hours. Just read up the news on this stuff, look it up on Google. You'll see that you'll work for these studios for 4 years. You'll work countless hours on it. Take a look at the studio that shut down in Vancouver recently that worked on the Sonic show, on the Sonic movie. These people busted their ass to be able to get that thing out. the project came out, it was done, everybody lost their job, and then they moved to another studio where it was cheaper. You see this a lot in 3D on the game and in television entertainment. We're all attracted to that because that's the next shiny object that we want to see, but it's going to be tough, and it really comes down to money for a lot of these studios, and so you have to be aware of what you're getting into with that. So, yeah.
Do we have a question up here?
Hi, I'm Gareth Busey. I'm Chair of Computer Science here at VIU. Hi, Tristan. Nice to see you back. And so my question is for people with doing the technical work, software engineers. And that would be, had you known that you were going to be ending up doing the work that you're doing, is there, besides the technical computer science courses, is there another course, other areas that you feel like you wish you developed in university, like creative writing, or economics, or accounting, or something else that could have added to what you're doing?
Oh, definitely, especially in a live ops mobile game, consideration for economics and just those systems will pay dividends as far as game design. I wasn't able to get a minor, but I did spend a few classes in economics, and it certainly has informed how I approach some game design principles and just troubleshooting issues in the live ops environment. Creative writing, history, I mean, all these things kind of inform your creative capabilities, right? And yeah.
To answer the first part of the question, I had no idea that my life would end up in games, so I don't really know how to, yeah, it just, life happens sometimes, but it's certainly something I wanted to do, I just couldn't find a way to do it for the longest time. And that's okay, and life is long and it can lead in very unexpected directions. In fact, coming out of computer science school, the last thing I wanted to do was a programming job, and actually, my first internship out of college was doing visual effects, like drawing out, like erasing wires and like drawing in lasers and stuff, really weird. But I think to my earlier point about like games being such a multi-dimensional medium, anything you study is going to be relevant to games. But is it going to be relevant to, it's not going to necessarily be relevant to engineering in game. So, but in terms of if you're just focusing into what engineering, what specific subcategories of computer science would be useful, because it's obviously an enormous field. A lot of it is actually architecture and software design, which is not necessarily in a computer science education. You get well-rounded, like used into all sorts of different stuff, and it's I think a lot of the stuff that you learn about, a lot of the stuff that's most important to learn about building large systems in a large team is really hard to learn in school, because it's not something you can replicate in a small, inside a snow globe. It's not something you can have an assignment to do, to work on a 30-person team with a bunch of different systems that interact. But large systems, architecture, that's, for me, maybe the most important thing in at least in computer science.
Good old logistics. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I took my AI degree in Toronto, it was a triple major of computer science and psychology and philosophy. And it sounds strange, but I think the philosophy for me was the thing that really helped me think beyond computer science, and really gave me a completely different perspective on things. But I think that maybe it was Tristan or Roger talked about diversity with it. I think is diversifying yourself, recognizing your shortfalls and your weaknesses and what you're not comfortable with, and learning that, I think, is just even a good skill in itself. Because at this stage in your life and your career, it starts to get you used to stepping outside of your comfort zone. And I think that that's just a really good skill to take, forward in your career. That it will build up your confidence. It will give you a different perspective on things, and you never know what that perspective is going to be. I've got a 11-year-old son who plays football, and he's really into it. and sometimes he's too into it, and then he doesn't want to do any other things. He just wants to do that. And there's studies that show that multi-sport athletes will end up being more successful in their careers than just people who focus on one sport, even to the point that they say, we don't know what that other sport should be. It could be ballet that improves your footwork, you know, but it should just be something else. And maybe even the more different that it is, the more helpful it might be.
That's great. We have another question here as well.
Hi, you're talking a lot about computer science. I'm not a computer science student. Do you think it's necessary to go into computer science in order to get into game design?
What's your field? What are you passionate about?
I'm in digital media studies. I'm actually in a game design class right now.
Sure. So I think definitely just computer science is one aspect of it, right? Engineering is one of the departments. And in fact, of the 18 people that we have working in our company, I would say we've got four here with Grant. Yeah, we have 4 engineers of the 18 people in our studio. So they're represented heavily here because our other people just happen to be busy with other things. But if you are interested in the game design aspect of games, which I presume you would be with that degree that you're working on, then like I said, I would look at something like going in through the community and getting a job there. Or you can come and talk to me after and I can talk to you about other classes or courses that you might take. But if that is something that you want to do, actually know Excel, get to know Excel, which I know doesn't sound fun and exciting or creative or anything like that, but it is so useful for a game designer in terms of balancing out your economies and working in live ops. And I think that that's one of the ways that we know where Tara is going to be successful in her role as a game designer in her studio, is to take her engineering programming background that she has and be able to really be powerful with her use of Excel. But there's certainly a lot more creative areas that you can go, but typically people want to do that. They want to be the writers and they want to create features for games, and that's fine if you want to do that sort of thing, but there's a lot of people in that field that focus on that. There's not too many people that focus on the more of kind of that really core game balance, analytics approach to it that is just so necessary for games to succeed.
That's great. We have about 4 more hands that I recognize right now, but recognizing the time as well, we'll ask those questions. Sounds as though you're open to having a little bit more of a conversation, certainly in here or in the lobby afterwards, but we'll have those 4 questions and then we'll wrap up for the afternoon. If you have to go now because it's a scheduled event till 3:30 and you have another class, feel free to do so, but we're going to stick around until those 4 questions are fielded and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so my question is, now that what we have seen recently is the gaming industry is moving into mobile, so what all are the marketing strategies or marketing approach these gaming companies or gaming industries needs to adopt in? Like recently social media marketing, or there are many different ways. So have you seen any change in the marketing approach? Earlier it was more or less word of mouth, you know. Now that, have you seen any social media marketing approach by the companies or something of that sort?
Yeah, I mean, you probably won't like the answer, but there is a marketing is very important for games. We can spend and do spend upwards of $500,000 a month per game to be able to market it for just straight user acquisition, which is essentially just buying users. We want a user that is going to spend this much money in a game. We will pay, $10 for that user, and we'll buy, 1,000 of them a day. And so and that's certainly probably the biggest part of it. But that's not great for people who are just kind of getting into the indie side of things. On that side, more it's about building a community. And so social media is a part of it. Being able to put hooks inside of your game as well, so that it's easily shareable with other people. Having a game that's really fun is important. and making sure that your game is a good quality game in terms of it's stable and as bug free as possible. You're responding to people's requests and needs and stuff like that really quickly, and it's just like that real kind of, you know, from the ground up marketing approach to it. And that way you build something up that you get enough money in the game that you then spend more money to do the easier approach to it.
So in part, I guess you would argue that it's acquisition and maintenance are sort of working concurrent in the use.
Yeah, I mean, man, we have this discussion all the time, right? If we're spending $500,000 a month in user acquisition for this game, well, why don't we spend, $350,000 and spend $150,000 in making actually a really good quality game? And I think that there's really something to that. That's so important, is just having a game that's going to get really solid ratings that people are just going to want to get on their own just because it's so good. That's the most important thing, really.
Good question, you?
Yeah, you talked briefly about passion and the importance of it. So how do you maintain your passion or reinvigorate it when you start to lose some of it in the midst of a project?
I go for long walks.
Yeah, really stepping away from it is the only thing. And whether that means focusing on another project or whether it means taking some time not working outside of work on your passion project, or even just trying something in a completely new field. Like, I enjoy roller skating and cooking. Those are my creative outlets outside of programming. It used to be that I could not go home and I wanted to be so badly like these people that just go home and experiment. They work all day coding and then they come up and they experiment. And they post these cool experiments. I had to come to terms with the fact that that was not me. I can't do that because after a day coding, I'm burnt out and I don't want to touch a computer after that. But 15 years later, I found electronics, and now that's something I can come home and do with my hands that's not totally analytical. So you'll find it, but don't force yourself to burn out.
Big old Karnoff maps. No. Yeah, I'm starting to learn that as well. It's very important to have a proper balance. That's not going to affect your passion at all or anything. It's just knowing when to draw the line, keep everyone happy.
I think if you can focus on those small wins, on those small little cycles, you get that win from it, and you get that excitement from it. Especially when you're working as a part of a team, because you might be having a down moment, but you see that everybody else on your team just fixed something that they didn't think that they were going to be able to fix, and that's the thing that energizes you and keeps you going. And I think that these guys are spot on too. And don't burn yourself out. It's a marathon; it's not a sprint. And I've had to have chats with Tristan before about do not do this stuff at home. Don't do anything related to computers at home. You need to find something else to not do that to yourself.
We have one question here and then one more at the front.
This is going to be more of a general programming question. The thing I found is the tornado of technologies and languages when you're trying to go through school, and you're C++, and then in your spare time, I've got to use the Boost library and not that way. And then, I need to build my own, make my own documentation that will make that generated with Python. And then this new language comes out in this framework. How do you keep up on all this stuff, or just choose one thing, because new things are coming out all the time?
Oh yeah, it doesn't get any better. There's always new technology. I think it becomes easier when you maybe it becomes easier when you get out of school, because in jobs, it's it just makes more sense organizationally to have a person who is good at X. So you have much more of an opportunity to focus in on your skill, and you aren't as drawn to all the other things. But on the other hand, getting experience in those other technologies makes you a more well-rounded programmer, and it's not a bad thing. You just have to, I think it's always going to be a storm of languages and new things, and it's weird, but I think the answer to that is just to be more compassionate to yourself and learn that, just to understand that you're not going to ever be the best coder, you're not going to ever understand everything, and to pick and choose which ones you want to work with. It's not going to be cutting off huge paths of your life to choose one language over another. There's always going to be another opportunity, so just don't worry too much about it. Pick the things that seem cool and go with them. And then if something's making you really frustrated, but something else seems cool, go ahead and switch. There's going to be a lot of time to specialize.
Agreed. In my own time, I've picked up TypeScript quite a bit, superset JavaScript, and I've kind of just rolled with that for my own personal projects. So it's just find something that you're comfortable with, that you find you learn quick, and you're productive with your projects.
I think for me, when I was taking comp sci back in school, I was having the same problem. Like, I learned so many different types of languages, and when am I ever going to use Prolog, you know, or when am I ever going to use Lisp, for example? I think, if I remember right, Lisp was the recursion, right? Right, and you know, what I really got from that is when I went out and I was working, and I had to not use Lisp, but I had to use recursion in order to be able to solve problems. It was because I had to build things in a language where recursion was such a big part of it that it wasn't such a scary thing. And I've been able to take not the syntax of what I used in those other languages, but the approaches that I learned from those other languages, and build that as kind of a diversified, you know, knowledge overall of programming, to know when I'm looking at a problem and how am I going to attack this problem, to think back, oh yeah, I wonder if I could try it this way of that Prolog program that I did like way back when, and it kind of shakes something loose in your head of a different way to approach it. And just as I've been saying before for a lot of other things, I think that diversity really helps in your problem solving. So maybe if you could take that approach to it, not that it's one language is trying to win the battle, that, you know, Python is a better language than C++, but more, I can learn to approach problems in a different way in Python than I can in C++, and I'm building up my knowledge base so that when I'm done with all of these things, then I'm going to be a more well-rounded engineer.
Just speaking from a recruiting perspective, when I would fill roles, they would never ever be, you must be proficient and super, super strong in these 15 or 20 languages. It was only ever, you know, we need somebody who's super strong in C++ or Python, and it was usually just one, maybe two. And then, oh, if you can have a general sense of these half a dozen other languages, but it was never, you had to be a master in them. It was more just a general familiarity. Most of the positions I would recruit for, that was the general theme. Be proficient in one, have a general sense of some others, and that would be the most of the jobs. And to sort of follow up on what Roger was saying, most of the people that I would interview and get, you know, for these positions, they didn't go to school and say, oh, I'm going to be a Python and just Python, and that's the only thing I'm going to do. It would be they were passionate about one or the other, or they preferred one, and it was usually just that they were led there naturally by their own, they gravitated there by their own personality.
You mentioned recursion. Just don't use it on the back end unless it's fine. Yeah, a stack or something.
So thank you very much. What our last question has decided that she'd like to hold off for now. But what I would like to do is thank our panelists for coming, and if I could, you know, give a summary sort of note. One of the things that I would take away from what they've all said in their various different ways, it's a mixture of passion, preparation, experimentation, and as equally putting yourself out there. And putting yourself out there leads to this one final conclusion that it is possible to end up in the gaming sector. It's not a one single path distance to travel. It's something that you kind of have to work your way through in a variety of different ways and ask questions and continue and continue and continue. And eventually you can end up in various parts of the sector, or you can end up in a parallel part of the sector. You can end up working in a non-technical or a very technical or a parallel hybrid role as well. And there are lots of ways for you as a student to think about that. I'd like to thank our guests for coming today, and I imagine they're willing to stick around for a few minutes afterwards for questions. But if you put your hands together, thank you very much.